Das ist das da. Ja.
Hä? Ja, kannst schon mal laufen lassen. Oder nein, davon kannst du warten. Hallo, 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 hallo. Hm?
Yeah, it works. All right. So, welcome everybody. We're very happy to have you here. Finally, after COVID, we're able to reunite here on our 5th edition of PolyHACK. And well, I hope you've all slept well because there's a long night ahead. And the first thing on our agenda, we have Nero here, Nero Shangajenra, president of Telejob, who is the association which, in partnership with the Neo, is organizing this edition of PolyHACK. He'll just introduce us a bit to Telejob. Warm applause for Nero.
Can you hear me? Works, right? Yeah. Thank you, Miguel. I just want to take 1 or 2 minutes to show you what Telejob is, because you might see it around, like in different labels. So we are also based at the ETH and Association of Scientific Staff Members, like postdocs, PhDs. And our idea is to connect students of ETH with their dream job. And we are also quite a big team of up to 20 people. You might see a few faces also during the 2 days, like today and tomorrow. And we are basically known for these 3 projects: ETH Get Hired, the job platform, PolyIFA, the virtual job fair, and PolyHACK, which is today, basically. And shortly to the story. So there's a like 5-year-old story, basically. So the first PolyHACK happened in 2017, and then it kept being a tradition. And actually 2020 was kind of interesting because of COVID. We went digital, so everything was online. And that's why we're also happy to have the 5th edition being at least hybrid. Like, a lot of you are here. We also have like nice dedicated keynote speaker and like challenge providers here, and also some people online. So we're really looking forward to it. And yeah, also looking forward to your pitches on Sunday. So I think climate innovation is also a topic which I like really favor and think is really important. So you're all contributing to this, and yeah, thank you for being here, and I'm looking forward. Thanks. Yeah, please.
We have 3 teams online this year. Only 3, but yeah, it's hybrid. It's very much hybrid.
Yes, please. Yes, yes. It's the safest way. Perfect. Not quite. Nope. Take it easy. Present. Amazing. Yes, perfect. Right, thank you. Thank you, Nero. My name is Alexis. I'd like to welcome you also on behalf of Neo Network to this event. I'm glad to see so many faces in person. The past months and year have been a bit tense, right, with all the pandemic, so I'm happy that we can organize events on campus again in this amazing facility that is a student product house in the city center. So also a welcome from Neo. So before we start with the event, I'd just like to give you a bit of a gist in a couple of minutes what Neo Network is and what we do. And so basically we're a student think tank, we are a student network that is interested in exploring tomorrow's challenges. And we do this at the largest Swiss universities. What I mean by that is that we're not only a hub in Zurich that connects people from UZH and ETH, but also we have hubs in St. Gallen, Olten, Winterthur, and even Lausanne. So we really take a Swiss-based approach to this network. And so what does it mean being interested in exploring tomorrow's challenges? Well, as the name says it, we're pretty future-oriented in the sense of we're interested in bringing and getting people interested about cutting-edge technologies, about the threats of such technologies, the applications, the opportunities they bring. And you can imagine applications in AI, sustainable finance, robotics, and so on and so forth, you name it. There are very many topics. And how do we explore these challenges? Well, we mostly partner up with leading industry experts, but also from academia, NGOs, entrepreneurs, and so forth. And we do this for students, by students at these different hubs. And so if you want the Neo vision or the keywords that define us are explore, connect, and impact. I think the explore one is pretty obvious, right? We're interested in exploring tomorrow's challenges by having such events with leading industry experts. Then the connect part, I think, happens at different levels. So of course we connect students with these experts, with entrepreneurs, with academics, but we also connect students among each other, right? We connect students within hubs, so within Zurich, across hubs, the different locations in Switzerland, but we also connect students across disciplinary fields because we have people from all the different field studies, but also across different seniorities, bachelor students, master students, and PhDs. And finally, the word impact. Well, we're not only interested in abstract challenges, but in fact, we're very much applied. So we're interested in concrete examples where technology can make a difference, but also where threats and opportunities can be seen. And here is basically the Neo value loop for you students. There's another one, of course, for companies, but since you're the audience today, that's what I'm presenting. And this also summarizes our 3 main activities. Again, the very obvious one, the Neo networking part, where we, for example, invite a couple of startups pitching about their solutions to sustainable finance or their solutions to the future of food, followed by an apéro where we really engage in informal exchange with the organizers and the other students. Then we have something which is a bit more concise, a bit smaller in format, which is the Neo Labs, where companies might bring a problem, a challenge, and actually ask students to come up with a couple solutions to it. And finally, our flagship events. If you know Neo, then you probably know it through our keynotes. We invite industry professionals, academics, and NGOs to present very specific takes on technological applications. And because there has been COVID, we just wanted to give you a few impressions about our past keynotes with some professionals. So I'm not going to stay on this slide a little longer, but here also a couple of our partners. Of course, we can't show them all, but these are the ones that actually triggered a lot of interest on campus. And finally, last but not least, if you have time, on the 11th of November, we have our next keynote, which is a collaboration with Schweizer Monat. This time it's going to be an event in German, so, but usually this is not the case. We have all our events in English, and this would be about autonomous weapons. So feel free to register for this event. And last but not least, if you're interested and motivated to learn more or to join us, please come to talk to us. We all have this sweater today, so feel free to just show your interest. And if you're certain you want to join, please feel free. All right, thank you very much.
All right, great. Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Nero. And now, next thing on our agenda, we have 2 speeches from scientists that are working on climate science or climate risks in general. And right now, I have the pleasure to introduce Anna Merrifield. And now let's see if I get it right. I'm going to try to introduce you. Anna Merrifield is a postdoc at ETH at the Institute for Atmospheric and Climate Science. She graduated in physics at MIT and completed her PhD in oceanography at the University of California, San Diego. And right now, I think she's even also involved with impact investing, or yes, as a part-time role in responsibility investments. Okay, just so let's welcome Anna. The big applause. And I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you. And I just want to give an opportunity for you guys that are out in the hall. If you guys want to come in, you're welcome to. Feel free. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm going to actually stand closer to my slides. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to kick things off. As Marco said, my name is Anna Merrifield. I am currently a postdoc in the Institute for Atmosphere and Climate, in climate physics specifically. And also, I have just returned from 6 months in industry working at Responsibility, which is an impact investing firm located right near Habe, which is quite a nice office location for us. And just to kick things off, we're here about solutions today, as you all know, and I just wanted to very broadly frame the problem that I think we're all pretty well aware of by this point. A couple days ago, the new emissions gap report came out from the United Nations Environmental Program. It basically is a report to say how the world is doing in terms of its reducing greenhouse gas emissions towards solving the climate crisis. As you can see from the deep red color of the graphic, we are not doing what we need to do in order to keep the world from warming more than 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Currently on track for 2.7, which is better than previous assessments, but still not great. And in order to kind of reach the ambitious aspirational goal of the Paris Agreement to stay at 1.5 degrees of warming, we would need to halve our annual greenhouse gas emissions in the next 8 years. So to put that kind of in a little bit more context, in the 2000s, emissions were going up year on year about 3% per year. In the 2010s, it slowed to about 1% emissions growth. COVID, which stopped the entire world, only represented about a 5.4% drop in emissions. And what we need to do to reach 1.5 would be 7.6%. So keep those numbers in mind. We need to cut emissions as fast as possible and as many emissions as possible. And so in order to do that, we need sort of everyone on board to tackle this major issue. We all have different roles to play. In academia, we have always had the role to kind of advance the state of the knowledge, but now I think we're finding that we have more responsibility to communicate publicly, to really start to mobilize, to bring these solutions to the fore. Also, obviously, educating you guys will be the people that come up with things that we have not even dreamed of. So it's very important also to help you guys achieve those goals. Also, I'll just kind of highlight the industry that I've most recently been working in, which is climate finance. The role there is to sort of bring the economy towards sustainability. Things like simply funding renewable energy projects. It's also very important, and this has sort of been a trend in the industry lately, to focus on investing not just for maximizing profit, but also considering impact, things like emissions reductions, social responsibility, those sorts of things as well. So rather than just try to get as much money as possible, many companies and industry leaders have turned to thinking about this in terms of a joint optimization problem along with impact. Additionally, we will need to finance climate adaptation all over the world. And so, yeah, there's a lot to do. And it's nice to see so many faces out here ready to work on the problem. I just wanted to highlight a few kind of solution-based things that I've been working on lately. For me, in particular, it's been really important to move my science away from just the sort of very small, narrow focuses that I had during my PhD to very practical things. One very low-hanging fruit thing is if you look at the kind of archive of global climate models, you'll see about 380 different climate model projections. Any end user will look at this and say, well, which ones should I use? I'm not going to use all 380. I don't have supercomputers to process all of these things. And so this example shows Central European climate, basically average temperature and average precipitation in the summer from these climate models. And you can see a lot of spread, a lot of diversity, but which ones should we pick if we want to, say, model future flooding in Germany? Seems like a reasonable thing to do with their regional model. Which models from this pile should we choose? And so you can determine this through figuring out, do your models realistically simulate what they need to simulate in order to solve your problem? So in this case, we care if they are able to simulate things that matter for regional European climate. And additionally, you have to think about each climate model. Is it an independent line of evidence towards climate change? And this is a very complicated topic, which I won't get into, but basically, are climate models different enough from each other to represent kind of a different kind of future outcome projection? What we see when we do this is that climate models come in families. So different modeling centers put out many different versions of their model. Different modeling centers collaborate with each other. So what you end up with is a large family tree of all the different climate models and how they sort of connect with each other over time. And what you can do here is you can basically minimize the cost function and say which of these 5 models are both kind of high performing for the task and also from different families, so independent of each other. And if you do that, you end up with these 5, which looks about like this. And so you get kind of a nice representation. You could throw this into a regional model and go from there. So, yeah. And so it's quite nice to be able to kind of go from just kind of model analysis to actually saying, hey, end user, this is what you need. Additionally, from climate finance, kind of a big area where things are moving is this idea of net zero. Many of the world's corporations are saying we will go to net zero by 2050 in line with the Paris Agreement. What does that actually mean? Will they do it? Are they doing it? Greenwashing is a real concern when companies make these statements. And so there are a lot of kind of opportunities to look through greenhouse gas reporting, auditing, that sort of thing, to figure out if companies are going to be able to do what they say they are going to do in terms of emissions reductions. So this plot is just sort of a schematic which shows year to year, companies will report their kind of scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, so direct emissions that they emit and then emissions in their supply chains. And you can see from there what they intended to do, where they are now, and what they would need to do. And you can kind of maybe make some rough determinations whether or not they'll be able to reach their net zero target based on how things are currently going. And so for you guys in particular, I think it's useful to familiarize a little bit with some of the open source available data that might help with some of your projects. So I just wanted to highlight a few data sets. One which is very nice is Our World in Data. It aggregates data from across scientific disciplines, economic disciplines, all free and open access, lots of great visualizations when you're making talks. You'll see a lot of plots from it from me. This one in particular, I hope will pique the interest of those of you working on the SBB problem. It shows carbon emissions intensity per flight distance. And as you can see, at short distances, carbon emissions intensity is much higher than for longer distance flights. So in terms of when you're thinking about your European vacation, this is maybe something people should know publicly. Additionally, here's another look at something a bit more economic. This map shows kind of trade routes for around the world. And as you can see, there's lots of great statistics there that you can use that are available. And the next kind of data repository, this is where companies disclose their carbon emissions. It's been running, it's a nonprofit that's been running since 2003. CDP stands for Carbon Disclosure Project, its old name. And in general, I think the most recent stat is a fifth of the world's climate emissions are reported through this repository. So it's not all open source, but there are some interesting features associated with the way that they score companies and climate. So if you're interested, you can take a look at that. Additionally, the Science Based Targets Initiative is another place where companies can come to figure out exactly how they should cut their emissions trajectories in order to kind of stay in line with the science. SBB is in line with the Science Based Targets Initiative. If you remember from my first slide, the halving greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, that's in line with the 1.5 degree C target, which is great. And in the similar vein, there's also the Transition Pathway TPI and Climate Action 100, which are similar repositories for information on how companies are doing. This plot shows some major global shipping companies and their carbon intensity per ton kilometer, how much their goods move. And you can see that a lot of them are kind of on track to cut, and they're below the kind of 2 degree line, but some maybe are going in the other direction. So yeah, with that, I just want to wish you all good luck. Hopefully, let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to contact me, and yeah, good luck.
Do you have any questions?
So actually that 2.7 is kind of much more complicated than that. The 2.7 is sort of the public facing number. There's a 66% likelihood of 2.7 based on kind of a suite of climate models. Usually they use kind of one climate model per modeling center in this kind of ensemble. My work argues this is not a great way to do it, but it is a way to do it. So, and it's a consistent way that's been kind of done over time. Oh, yeah, of course.
It's connected to this one.
I can imagine that the performance of these people
Actually, sorry, I couldn't really hear. Could we get you a mic? Thanks.
Okay, so I'm just asking, what is the population rate or growth rate in this prediction? And also maybe, yeah, performance per each person is getting better, but in general, population growth can beat this. Or also, we are also consuming basically different products and more products in general. Like for each of them, the performance is getting better, but the number of the products or the techniques we are also using is getting more and more.
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think you are going to very much enjoy our next speaker, who will actually cover, I think, exactly this in his presentation, or something very much along these lines. So I won't spoil his talk, but he'll talk exactly about that. Great, perfect.
All right, thank you very much. I was wondering, maybe some of them are thinking if they can have access to some of the sources that you showed us. Maybe you can provide them with the sources.
I can
Great.
send the link.
Great, awesome. Just yeah. All right, and up next, as Anna, Mrs. Merrifield was saying, up. We have, sorry, I have to turn the page. No, where do I have this one? Oh my God. Okay. Oh, yeah, I have it here. So up next, we have Professor David Bresch. He's a professor, he teaches at ETH, teaches weather and climate risks. He holds a PhD in physics from ETH, and he's been research associate at MIT for a year, 1998. And he also spent quite some time in industry as the global head of sustainability for Swiss Re. So yeah, let's give it up for Professor David Bresch. Bresch, sorry. Here, mic's free.
Thanks a lot. A real pleasure to be here, also to share a couple of my thoughts, ideas, insights, and definitely watch out an open source approach to what I'm going to say, so you can later play with things. What I would like to focus on is really how we can globally consistent fashion look at impacts of climate change. So while Anna was mainly talking about the root cause of the problem, us emitting, so how we mitigate climate change, we reduce emissions, I look in my group mainly at how we can deal with the problems we face and the problems we inflict on ourselves by the way we behave. So it has a strong link also to the behavioral side, but more on how we manage risks, how we manage impacts of climate change. And basically my talk is also trying to prep you a bit to get your hands dirty in a sense. All we do is always open source and access, same vein as Anna said. So I think our insights only play back to society if people can make use of, can drive and take it from and build on their own. Because I think leadership is one thing into the direction of better understanding a climate system, but keeping people with you and getting basically everybody on that track to figure what does it mean for me means also you have to provide not only the data but also the knowledge around the data, and last but not least the tools to crunch the numbers for people to deeply and truly understand. What keeps me busy in my group is basically a bit the tagline at the bottom. How do we make sure all the things we know about the complex system, namely say the climate system, but it's really ocean, land, the atmosphere, and last but not least in the Anthropocene, the way we as societies shape that kind of landscape. What can we make sure all we know about the system makes it into decision making, supports better, more sustainable decisions. And the important point here is also the adequate. So how we make sure it's adequately used, because there are a lot of decisions which do really not depend on climate change. And we should not confuse matters. But there are a lot of decisions which would really benefit, would we take that also into account. So that's a bit the spirit of my work and the work of my group. It's normally citing at the bottom who did what, otherwise the slides are a bit kind of showcasing stuff. So you have to dig deeper, and there's occasional QR codes interspersed. You might photograph them off and then you can really dig into the stuff in detail. I brought with me a couple examples, really putting this globally consistent impact modeling into practice. That's the first part. And it goes a bit to also the population question. And second then, a few thoughts about how do we now jointly tackle these things by applying the numbers to a specific problem. And that might be also to your direct interest and use. I hope the animation comes. Yeah, so that's one way to look at globally consistent modeling. So it's the globe. It's playing back since the early 90s. Every year the tropical cyclones on the whole planet. Underlaid is what's there in terms of people and assets. I think this is the picture on impact on assets. And that the simulation adds up or accumulates damage is in all coastal areas around the globe. It's also a turning version where you see it's not only on the Asian theater, it's obviously also on the Atlantic side, but that's normally well known. So you see here every year tropical cyclone hitting coastal areas, and over time, basically no place is spared. So even just looking back in history, we learn a lot about impacts of weather on populations, livelihoods, you name it. But that's not good enough to drive decisions going forward, because first, there have been places being spared just by luck, sheer luck. Other places because nothing can happen there for physical reasons. That's us understanding the common system, the current system. And then so the challenge, how does that change, or how might that change going forward? These are no predictions, these are projections. So it's always a what if. What if we emit like that? What does it mean in terms of impact? So that's why the 2-degree target, or well below 2 degrees, as we say since Paris, is extremely important. We have a kind of a shared understanding. And it's really a shared understanding. It's not an absolutely precise number. That we should stay within that safe operating space. It makes a bit of a link to the donut economy thinking, that we only have one planet. We're currently overusing it currently quite to some extent. And so that would be the safe operating space for mankind. And these models can help us understand what does that mean. If we want to stay within that safe operating space, it still means increase in risk in many places. And that simulation just gives you a bit of a first gist to it. That's the global picture, but normally look at things a bit more specifically. That's now, and not to go to the numbers, but to basically only show we've basically done that for all past tropical cyclones, running the model and calibrating it, so the bars are normally on the bottom. How well did the model perform compared to past damages? And the model here is run in a probabilistic fashion. So it doesn't run only historic event, it also runs all events that are physically plausible in today's climate. So to close these gaps I mentioned, where just a stretch of coast has been lucky, and that stretch of coast in this model is hit at the commensurate probability of hitting given current climate. And then you can use the same model going forward and basically use it, but now to really project damage and project, for example, the impact on affected population on the right. The numbers are always, as with these slides, a bit small, but the point is the following, that if you look at the absolute, there is quite an increase in how many people will be affected. 20, what did I put here? I think it's 2050, say, as a time horizon. And that's a part of the answer to the question, yes, if there is a larger population and the SSP, so the shared sustainable pathway, so basically how will we as society globally develop going forward, both in terms of number of people, livelihoods, consumption, these are underpinning the model results and has been shown. And there are different choices to be made, and that's IASA in Vienna. Look up their page, you can download all these projections again, no predictions, and you can see then where on a planet what is going to change in terms of number of people, GDP and so on, and you can use these numbers to drive your understanding of the future. And if you put these two numbers into it, so on the one hand you put in climate change and you put in people changing in terms of population growth is driving the impact going forward up to 2050 at least. So climate change aggravates the problem, but just the sheer fact that more people are living at higher standards in coastal areas does increase risk more strongly than does climate change. As Anna said, we don't do that with one climate model. It's a plethora of models. And what's also interesting, if you ask a question about what you want to do, you might want to run as many models as possible. And only if there is a model combination you cannot survive with, that's the moment to ask, is this model combination a particularly relevant, a particularly stable one? So sometimes it's good to pick models up front because it reduces number crunching time and the effort you have to take. And sometimes it's good if you look at it from the solution space to say, what can all happen to what I want to achieve? That's probably a definition of risk, uncertainty on effectives or objectives you want to reach. And then you could say, aha, under all conditions I can make it. That's nice. I just stress test my assumption. Or you might say, under more than a half of the projections, I cannot do it. And then you look more deeply into what these projections are. And these models can help you to exactly tackle the problem from both sides. That was the tropical cyclone perspective. River flood, similar thing. You have the steep increase of the number of potentially displaced people. You see my wording here. Potentially displaced. This is not a prediction. This is again a projection. If we emit going forward, the 2.7 has been mentioned on that track, then by mid-century we're going to see many, many more people displaced, and by end century even more. It's order of 400%, so kind of 4 times more people being displaced by the end of the century if we don't do anything to the system. Displaced here does not mean large-scale migration. This means people displaced because it's flooding, they have to run away. But most of them come back, but likely not in better shape. And then if you say, let's look at the world with stable population, and that's the right side of the image, then yes, there is change in how flooding is going to happen on this planet, but that change, just climate-induced change in flooding, is not a killer. Let's be honest. It's the superposition of how we change as a society, the left side of things, plus the aggravating fact of climate change. And why climate change is still of deep concern is that people might adjust to their past. So they might say, oh, it has been flooding there, I'm not going to go there. But it could very well change and things might be flooded more deeply, more often than in the past. And that's why you need the models to do these projections. Also important to say, at a certain pressure of development, people are going to build in floodplains. Well, look around Switzerland. And just yesterday was a big article that a lot of development, also in Central Europe, happens in places where you just should be honest to yourself and say, sorry, it just doesn't make too much sense. Wüst & Partner, and a basically real estate evaluation firm, looked at it and said, there are really a lot of built infrastructure in Switzerland, in places you at least should, if you want to do it, you have to do it more strongly. And it comes at a price. And that's also an interesting angle to look at how we shape and develop the world around us. That's how we're going to perceive risk, and I mean perceive, live through risky times. That's the flood perspective of it, and then you can also put it back in numbers, and also on the flooding, now not so much on people displaced, but again on damage on infrastructure and assets. The same story. The damage is big, obviously, and the change in it is also big going over time. It's 5% per year of a change. It's a higher impact on assets than on people because our people are a bit more flexible to tolerate some things. And again, here the key driver is the growth of values and the growth and the development of things, which is in fact a good thing if it's done in a climate compatible fashion. So the key thing is, how can we design our infrastructure, the way we live, livelihoods, such that we can tolerate some kind of shocks and disturbances? Means how can we develop in a resilient fashion? And we can only do so if we stick within the Paris range. And that's now more, you sense the way I'm saying that, this is not precise science. It's had a lot of elements which go deep into how do societies shape their coming and living together. And that will be an endless quest, and will be an endless debate, and that's good so, because nobody knows the answer. Where do we want to be as a society is normally a participative process, and we're part of that. And in that process, I think it's just important to have these numbers at hand to guide our future and say, what would be if? And I think you have a big role to play in that conversation, to say, we can provide some of these numbers and the context around it. So that was for the examples. We're currently working on wildfires too. I tried to really cover the planet 4 kilometers with all these models. And basically wildfire the same, just looking at, can we mimic the past? And here we have the future ahead of us to think about the development of wildfires. You can also use these things, and I'm going to speed up because the model part is just a few advertisement slides. Basically, you can use it to warn people. That's how we currently warn in Switzerland, the warning system of MeteoSwiss. That's the operational system for Burglind. It was a moderate warning, large scale. If you now underpin an impact model, so you put in what's there in Switzerland at 1 kilometer resolution, and you run a storm across it, you see where it really hits. And all of a sudden, it's not anymore a widespread thing to be warned. It's really the metropolitan area of Zurich and a bit of the Mittelland, which has which might see a lot of damage, which in fact happened during Burg Lind, and that was 2 days in advance. So you can much more precisely tell people, here you might have a problem in the next coming days, and that's much easier then to prepare for this particular outcome, if you know more precisely, or more, I would say, yeah, more precisely what's coming. Underpinning all of what I've said is obviously the IPCC definition of risk. I don't want to go into this, just to provide you with a bit of framing. Look it up. That's the seminal piece which brings together all the impact understanding we have at the moment. The next report is out next April, if I'm well informed. And then obviously what we do, we just translate is the same propeller into a Python code. And this Python code does the following. It takes storms running across places like here, Bangladesh, and then you underpin it with population density or assets, for example, and then it gives you the impact on people or assets in any place on the planet. You can play with that for a single event, as shown here, for many events historically, or then also taking climate change into account. All driven by an API, so you can download this stuff. I go through that. You can download these data sets already. So you basically can use them in the API. I can say, I'd like to get winter storms. That's probably not the most concern for you, but I can take all the flood events on the planet on the different climate change scenarios and play with those in a Python type of environment. It's HDF5 files. You might not even want the code. You might just want the data. Please feel free to do so. And then also important is that basically you use that data to crunch the numbers. There's an open source engine which does all what I've been showing before. That's a bit of an infograph. You find it on the web page behind the QR code. It's maintained. So it's basically every day we run an integration test on the cloud to make sure what you download is really working. I can 98% promise you if you download it works. There's sometimes small glitches, but there's an IT professional who basically makes sure the thing is really stable. So it's not anymore kind of something brittle. It's really an object-oriented environment to deal with these things in a stable fashion. Runs on the Euler cluster, obviously. You might have a look at that. API I mentioned, and then basically to get your hands dirty, and that's the end of my talk here. This is the thing to look at. It's Jupyter scripts. The 2 QR codes drive you directly there. And these Jupyter scripts, you get or kind of notebooks, you get a very good feeling what it takes. And it takes you a few lines of code to get kind of tropical cyclones on your machine. It takes you a few lines of code basically on this side to approach the data API. Obviously, it's 2 lines. It's the HTTP address and the fetching command. And there you are. You have your HDF5 file you can play with. Just to give you a bit of an insight what you can do, I try to convince you that impacts matter. The way we shape our environment not only matters on the mitigation side, means how we reduce emissions, it also matters very much on the adaptation side. So how do we prepare for things to come? And I would say there is some element in that conversation which benefits from us better understanding the numbers behind. But my last comment here, the numbers we produce, I perceive as a basis for a discussion and not as the end point of it. Means these numbers are quite normatively loaded. So what models I take, what I focus on, with whom I talk, has a deep impact on what comes out. And you have to take that into account. So when you get your hands dirty later on, always also think about who is the end user, what might these people perceive, what might be their environment they're operating in. Because just throwing numbers at people is not too much avail. And I hope I didn't do that. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Berg. Now, if you have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, people are probably busy scanning these QR codes.
Yeah. Actually, we can provide them later with the, right?
Yeah, please do so. Yeah. And also the slides, all is open, obviously. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks. Yeah.
We have been discussing about damage, for example, in sense of damage of buildings, etc. What about cost of climate disruption in terms of human lives? Is there any way to project this, to predict statistically the victims, at least in rough numbers? And also, how does this impact the economic side as well, please?
In fact, I probably wasn't precise enough. This study here on flood displacement is on displacement, and a small fraction of these people will unfortunately also die. Now, the framing we felt, there are studies, we do also studies on looking at just health impacts in terms of excess death, a framing which now is known to all of us since recently. We can do so. I just learned many conversations are more fruitful if you start with affected people than dead people. And part of the affected might unfortunately be dead, but there is a step in between. And that's how you deal with these people and how you deal with the way they can react to things. And that's why normally the studies are more on the affected people range, but since the model is driven by what we call an impact function, it's a functional relationship between the flood height, say, and the number of deaths. And we know from studies, even at 50 centimeters of flood, you have quite a number of casualties. Because if I would stumble here, there's water up to here, and I would stumble here and hit my head, I might be unconscious and I'm just gone. And so basically when people have to displace, this is not an orderly process. And so you can figure what's the fraction of those being severely kind of hurt or those who ultimately will not make it. Possible to do so, again, if you crunch the numbers, and also for that one is a Jupyter script. So each of my papers has a Jupyter script behind, you can play the numbers, because otherwise I could not say we're sharing. And so basically there you could just change and say, I don't take displacement, I aggravate the curve, say, and say, let's assume 5% are the ones who do not make it, and then you get your result. Thanks.
Do you have a question, Anna?
Hey, thanks for the talk. Do any of your models deal with pollution? So say for microplastics or PM2.5 or other, say, non-climate related damages? I'm thinking more of, say, yeah, plastics and how that affects people's health.
No. I learned pick your battles. It's impossible. But structurally, the model does the following. You put in a layer of spatially explicit living beings or stuff that can be hit by something. And the hitting is this stack of spatially explicit events that hit the stuff. So if you would say plastic pollution has some impact, so say on marine livelihoods, you obviously could say I put in marine livelihoods as my exposure, and I put in, say, the plastic gyre as the event, as we call it in the model mind, as the thing, the hazard that hits things. But I would be cautious whether that model would be the best one to do so, because there might be much more complex processes going on than if a storm just hits a building, where you normally can say on average, on a square kilometer, at that wind speed, 2% of the things get damaged. Or you could say, like in the flooding, the model runs at 4 kilometers, so that's 16 square kilometers. And it has, what's the fraction that's flooded by more than something, like more than 50 centimeters, and it's run at 500 meters and then aggregated for storage purposes. There you basically can say something about people and livelihoods and assets, but if you would like to use it for ecosystem impacts, I think you have to bring your own data and increase the resolution. Except for tropical cyclones, where there I think it's for many of the big questions a very good starting point. But for flood, for example, flood impacts on ecosystems, I think 4 kilometers, and I mean, I know that the hydrologists normally kill me anyway. So but would I go to their conferences, they would just basically kick me out. But I think we have to start somewhere and then improve, because we use that model also at 100 meters resolution in cityscapes, because we cannot do that globally yet, but we can do it on the city scale. So you might, if you bring your own data, you can do a lot, but for this particular problem, I would not really recommend to use that type of system. Use it for big events, storms, flooding events, wildfire, droughts is somewhere else in the API. There it really works. But for the more granular stuff, you might look at other sources. Thanks. And sorry for the longer answer.
No, no worries.
Provide
Thank you.
background framing.
So my question actually involves this Switzerland flood risk thing that you mentioned. Can you comment more on where exactly these risks are happening? Is Zurich a place? Do we need to do more?
Thanks. That's almost a trigger question. Because yes, Zurich is very much at risk. You probably know the number, 6 billion is the projected damage for the one in 100 type of flood event, and we're not protected against it at the moment. There is the Siel Stausee, so there's a retention basin up in Einsiedeln, the Sielsee, as it is called, Siel Lake, and it's connected to Zurich with the Siel, the river Siel. And the river Siel could basically, in this place where the lake is, there could be so much inundation in summer especially, that it would overflow, or you basically have to open the valve because otherwise the barrage, the dam is breaking, and that could create a huge flood wave hitting Zurich and destroying up to 6 billion in assets. Now the solution, first we thought, is we're going to connect the steering system or the management system of that lake with the latest up to whatever state-of-the-art weather prediction system from MeteoSwiss, an ensemble prediction system. But we learned there are still a couple risks in that, and a couple events where even if you could manage the lake, you cannot capture them. So we're going to drill a tunnel. We're in Switzerland. So it's one of yet another hole. It's cheese, right? So basically we drill a hole from close to Langnau through into the Lake of Zurich. And that kind of tunnel will help the river Siel to discharge into the lake. And the lake is like a big buffer. So it increases a little bit the lake level, and then it will smoothly evacuate. So that's the river Siel problem. Now, if you want for a very specific place on the planet, in Switzerland, to look what the risk is, it's all mapped out. So there is the Gefahrenhinweiskarte. That's a hazard indication map. And basically for each canton is, you see, federal state, each canton has a bit of a slightly different method, but it exists now for all cantons and all built up areas. It's basically a GIS layer, you can look at it, and most cantons like Zurich, you can download, and you basically can locate. It's really, resolution is a couple meters. And it really tells you this is a red area, means in this area you should never have built according to the risk of flood. But things might still be there. So then there is the rule, if whenever you touch your house, you have to rebuild or change, or basically it's the end of you living there. And that exists. There is also the other zones which are not so harsh, but it's all known. And the recent article by Wüst & Partner, this firm, they looked at it and said, it's kind of reflected a little bit in real estate prices, but you probably know what the price is living at the lakeshore. It's top locations, and people don't care. And that's fine as long as they're aware of the risk. It's not to say you're not allowed to build in a red zone, but build and live there commensurate with the risk. That's probably the message. Thanks.
Okay, I might actually also have a question. So you've talked, I assume these models work on short time effects or time damages, but what about the long-term damages? Or like, I suppose some families might be displaced because of extreme weather conditions and extreme heat, and then that can actually lead to a long-term, economical effects, like these families have to be displaced from their countries or maybe end up dying, also having a life that's shortened or life expectancy. So I'm assuming these models cannot take all that into account, obviously, but I was wondering, what is the estimate of how this changes in the long term?
I mean, science moves in baby steps because you have to do it very carefully and consciously. So there is compound causation. It could be you have a very long drought and then at the end a downpour. And that's a completely different outcome for agriculture than if it's benign farming and a bit of rain. And so because the drought might really dry out the soil so much that comes the downpour, it just flushes all topsoil, and you have basically no fertility left. And this is compound causation of an issue. And then you have your cascading consequences. Staying in the same picture, all this flushed fertile soil might then clog all your downstream facilities. And so you have cascading consequences out of basically compound causation. And the model is at the middle of it. So you can run the model with more than one hazard, but you as a user have to figure how I combine, because that's often quite something you have to deeply research into. And you can also say, I use the outputs in more than one fashion. What comes out of the model is, again, a spatially and temporally explicit huge table. It's a matrix of damages. One dimension is the event, and the other dimension is all the places it hits. And then you have that. And you can say, how many times is a place hit? That's some of the numbers I shown here. Or you can ask, if that place is hit later a second time, is that reset to 0 and it starts from 0, or should I sum these numbers up? And there's one PhD in my group that's just nothing else but scratching her head to figure, how should I combine these numbers in the time dimension? Last point, currently the model is more fit for shock type of events. So single events have a start, an end, and an impact, and you can calculate and put it in a table. But there is also creeping in change, what you often call slow onset events. Sea level rise, for example. Sea level rise is easy. That's easy to calculate. But others are a bit more difficult, like degradation of land. And I have to say, when I look at the Paris targets, we do not so much need to make them for the extremes. The reason we really have to make these targets is because I have no clue whether coral reefs survive beyond 1.5 degrees of warming. And that might be the end of the food chain in some places. And so that's a problem we're not tackling. My group really looks at the extreme events and the way I've shown it here. But very important to also frame the things you're doing. You cannot solve all the problems at the same time, even so I would love to do so, but there's a limit to that. There was one question up there.
Yeah, micro.
I just want to ask, does the total volume of liquid or water is known, and also does it change due to global warming, or why basically, and in the end, like what is the extreme case?
You have to answer this question. You have to answer this question. I can't. The total volume of water.
Yeah,
Now,
I mean, what is the end goal? Like at the end, like all the entire planet will cover by water, like in the extreme case?
No, and then you have to help me with that. I think if we melt all the polar ice sheets, we get 70 meters plus. That's not nice for coastal areas, but in Switzerland we're safe. Yeah, and you know how silly this answer is. Yeah, the point is, even 50 centimeters of sea level rise is a global challenge, because we have supply chains, we are interconnected, and this is not an easy game. But so one can do these things, and what's really interesting, look at the storylines. For the first time in the IPCC Working Group 1, there's not only the range with probabilities what can happen, it's also the upper lid. How to say, what if things really turn sour? And before, the IPCC had a hard time to even say that, and now it's in. And then you see, there might be also a little bit more sea level rise than what the probabilistic approach we've been shown is telling you. And for some decisions, you might want to take that into account. But the 70 meters, that's glacial scales. So that takes 1,000 years or so. So by the end of the century, I think the maximum is still at 2-something meters or so. And that's a lot. People think, 2 meters, I just step up a few stairs here and I'm fine. But a lot of coastal ecosystems are on a super, super tiny slope. So this will be huge stretches of land being flooded, and that's not the problem. The problem is that all the livelihoods and all the ecosystems will not function if they're underwater. And some will take longer than the flooding time to reconsider, to reconfigure, and to really operate again. And I think we put a lot of stress on the system. But I don't have to tell you that one. But longer answer to that. Anna?
I think also to think about land subsidence, erosion. I mean, we're losing land, permafrost in a lot of places too. So just generally the shape of the coastline is projected to be vastly different in the future than what we've currently come to inhabit, unfortunately.
It's like the Maldives, right? It was the lowest lying piece of land, I think, or they were building some. Anyway, okay, so I think now we have time for a little pause, coffee pause, or whatever you want to do now for 10 minutes at least, and then we go straight for the challenge introductions from SBB and Currentix. Right. For everybody that wants to eat anything, there's food on the J floor. So that's the top floor. You can access it through the stairs on that side of the building or through the elevator. Yes.
Ich glaube, wir müssen das nehmen. Ah ja, jetzt. Can't hear them.
Ago, the pioneers of SBB revolutionized mobility for all of Switzerland, one step at a time. Since then, it's been full steam ahead as we've developed and electrified public transport. We simplified timetables in 1982. We became a public limited company in 1999.
I couldn't do it, honestly. Yeah, that's right. All the bar is okay, but if you're there, it's I mean, for the people here, it's fine to hear.
More than 100 years ago, the pioneers of SBB revolutionized mobility for all of Switzerland.
Hello, hello. So gather up. We have everybody here, I guess. Yes. So now we have we go into the second stage. We have the introductions of both challenges, and now we have Christoph Weidler and Mahalia Stefan. We're going to introduce you to the SBB challenge. And well, the floor is yours. Go.
Thank you, Miguel, for introduction. Yeah, welcome to PolyHACK 2021 from SBB, the Swiss Federal Railways. And my name is Mahalia Stefan. I'm project manager with SBB, and it's my pleasure today to introduce you to the SBB challenge together with my colleague Christoph Wiedler, who's business partner at SBB. And yeah, we wanted to introduce you to the challenge, how to get more people excited about choosing public transport for doing the leisure trips, and so contribute to a sustainable future. Yeah. For example, yeah, if you go to from Zurich to Kaumersee, yeah, if you haven't been there in Graubünden, it's really, really beautiful, and I would advise you to go. And if you would go there, then your attribution to the CO2 emissions would be about 1,000 gram CO2. And if you would do the same trip by your own car, it would be about 30,000 grams CO2 emissions. So it's 30 times if you go on by car. And it shows, yeah, that the public transport is really the most, yeah, environmentally friendly mode of transport. In addition to that, we are going to be, our ambition is to to use 100% of renewable energy by 2025. And the ambition also is to be climate neutral by 2030. So who are we and what is our business like? What are we doing and how do we do things? We want to show you in a short video.
More than 100 years ago, the pioneers of SBB revolutionized mobility for all of Switzerland, one step at a time. Since then, it's been full steam ahead as we've developed and electrified public transport. We simplified timetables in 1982. We became a public limited company in 1999 and reached a historic milestone with the Rail 2000 project. We are one of the world's best rail companies and the most punctual operation in Europe. On our 3,000-kilometer track network, we reliably transport more than 1.2 million people and over 200,000 tons of freight every day. With our properties, site developments and stations, offices and residential accommodation, operational and production facilities, we make a major contribution to the quality of life in Switzerland, at work and at home. All of this is made possible by the outstanding performance that 33,000 employees deliver each and every day. With the longest rail tunnel in the world, we are proving once again that we have the Swiss qualities of innovation, precision, and reliability, and that our ambitions know no boundaries. With new technologies and digitalization, developments in the field of mobility are gaining momentum, but so is uncertainty. Competition between transport providers for a place in the mobility chain is intensifying. Our overall operating costs are rising, public funds are growing scarcer, and other modes of transport are getting cheaper. New technologies let us take quantum leaps. We are increasing efficiency and punctuality and aiming to stay ahead of the environmental curve. In doing so, we focus on rail's strengths, good value for money for our customers, and the affordability of public transport for ordering parties. The Swiss Federation and the cantons is a major challenge that has to be met now for the future. Our mobility of the future must be simple, because our products and services are not yet simple enough. Our mobility of the future must be personal, Because our customers want more personalized service in all areas of their lives. Mobility of the future must be connected because it's impossible for one rail company to keep everything moving on its own. We want to take on all these challenges with motivated teams, with our true spirit, the legendary passion of railway workers, and with plenty of positive energy. Together, we are turning today's vision into tomorrow's reality. Rail excellence and shaping the mobility of the future. Simple, personal, connected.
So thank you very much for your work this weekend for SBB and public transport. I'm Chris. I'm a team coach, product service and events. Sorry about my really basic English. So if you don't understand me, just interrupt and ask. I've got a first question. When you're thinking about SBB, for you SBB is a commuter railway or a leisure railway? Who is thinking commuter? Okay. Leisure? Okay. And the rest, maybe both. Not really, maybe we are really both. And more we try to introduce the leisure traffic, and that's why you're here. We have got significant difference between weekend and weekdays. At Mondays to Friday, the commuters, then we have got a share of distance, and the traveling by car from Monday to Friday is by 62%, public transport 31%. And now the weekends, it's clearly the opposite. We've got 70% that use cars, and only 21% are traveling by public transports. Why do you think is this? Yes, that's one possibility. Then you've got luggage, etc. And we know that the Swiss people is a really multimodal movement. So they have got a car and they've got flat rate pass to travel along to Switzerland. And this is why you're here. We want to change this. We've got the chance to change and influence this situation. We have the clear potential to attract people with an affinity to public transports, also to use the public transports during weekends. Our commuters, we want to invite to use the public transports also the weekends. Our leisure guests and travelers, they have different ages, they have different life situations, they have different personal needs. Family, for example, needs space, the children want to move around, and luggage needs to be placed. The bikers, they must have a place for their bike, of course. The groups want to be able to talk loudly. And the couples would rather have peace and quiet. And this is true. The canoeist brings his boat into the train. So in trains, the people are playing, eating, chatting, sleeping, and 1,000 more things. The benefit, time on the train. That's our advantage. But also a challenge, because sometimes there are conflicts, conflicting goals, and different needs. In the tourism industry, there are different target groups, called target groups. We've got domestic, travelers from Switzerland with destinations into Switzerland. Outgoing, so travelers from Switzerland to destinations abroad. And incoming, travelers with destinations in Switzerland. The shared with Corona by the domestics increased, by incoming it decreased. We will see if this continues. The tourism industry expects that travel activities will increase significantly again. For your work now, this weekend, doesn't matter which of this group you focus on. But please remember that the needs of this group can be different. Remember please also that mobility is one of the most energy intensive aspects of the travel. You've heard it maybe before. So the increase of the share of rail travel is needed for a sustainable development. SBB and public transport already do a lot of leisure holidays trips for the leisure and holiday trips. For example, luggage transport services, or family coaches, or bike transport. But we know there is still a lot of work to do. For example, to buy easy a ticket for leisure trips. The luggage transport today is simply unknown. Enough seats in leisure peak times, for example, Friday evening and Sunday evening. And the last mile, only a pass bus called Porsche every 4 hours in a nature park, for example, is different from the situation here in the city, where we've got a bus or tram every 5 minutes. And so on. We know this. We are on it and we stay on it. So maybe these things is not so the focus this weekend. But if you've got great ideas for great service solutions in combinations with how we bring more guests in leisure and holiday traffics into public transport, so of course they are still welcome. SBB is partnering with several touristic players in Switzerland. Here some examples, of course there are a lot of more. Railway, our subsidiary company, a leisure company, They are doing marketing for leisure service with a focus of domestic and leisure inspirations. Swiss Tourism is the Swiss tourism marketing organization with the focus of overnight stays. And the Swiss travel system, they've got focus abroad with sales of tickets, for example, the Swiss travel pass, an unlimited, you've got the possibility to unlimited travels to Switzerland. Then Hotellerie Suisse, the Hotel Entrepreneurs Associations, Swiss STC, the Swiss Travel Center, is a tour operator. They combine hotel, railway services and individual around trips. And then also Swiss Parks is a network of Swiss nature parks and also a partner of this event. And they want also more guests in their parks by train and public transports. And that's why you are here. And thank you very much for your support.
Thank you, Christoph, for the introduction to the leisure market. Those obstacles and chances bring us back to the introducing question, how to get more people to be excited to do their leisure trips by public transport. To get it more tangible, we have chosen 3 examples and 1 more open question I would just want to explain to you. The first idea is about hiking experience. Like if you want to choose a hiking experience or a hiking route, you're looking maybe for an easy hiking route and going to Google and just type it in. And then the idea is that you get a bundled offering for a hiking trip, a hiking route, a map maybe, and also the public transport informations and also the possibility to just click and go. That means just buy a ticket without registering on Swisspass or any platform, just easy go and have a bundled offering. The second question is about the Swiss Parks. Like Christoph already told you, they have the idea that we find a solution for the whole journey. So a lot of people just go by car to the Swiss parks because the last mile is quite far for walking. That means that the distance between the last public transport station to maybe the entry point to the park where the hiking route starts, or the hotel or the camping ground maybe is quite far. So they say, okay, I don't want to walk in the end, so I just get the car and do the whole journey by car. The third question is about your travel, and the idea is to give the leisure travelers interesting and exciting information about their journey. That means that maybe you go by train and crossing a bridge, and then you get information about the river or the next city, and you get advices where to go, what you can do in the city, sightseeing, stuff like this. And for that, we have, like I brought you, we have beacons in the trains. I don't know if you know beacons, but for the hackathon, you just can assume that we know where the people are by the beacons and the schedule timetable. Yes. And the last question is more open. Like if you want to include some of the ideas Christoph just told you, we are asking you to looking from your perspective. Just say, okay, what would you inspire to choose the train instead of the car? And maybe as a young user, maybe you have family, you have handicapped people, and you want to see this view, and you're really, really open to find your own ideas. Like Christoph also told you, we are really interesting to find solution with our partners. So if you're thinking about to solve the problems or the challenges, don't look just in the SBB ecosystem. We have an app, we have a website, we have everything, but really focus on possibilities to go outside to see with the partners. Maybe there's a way to find a solution, and then we also connect with them, and they're really interested in solutions. So we are like an ecosystem, and don't think just about the SBB logo. Yeah. To solve this questions, we also provide some APIs. I just give you a really, really quick introduction what is around. There are more details with the coach later. So to solve the problems or the challenges, we provide, of course, APIs. They include data and also kind of services, and we provide the timetable information, pricing information, and we also have our own maps. That means we have map styles, we have different routing options by footpath, own algorithm you can just use, and also new point of interest. There are several point of interest you can just get the data from. Another thing, maybe if you are going on leisure trip, the weather is really important, so we also provide an API for getting the weather data. And then there are more open, like not SBB special APIs, but also you can use. That's, for example, like the service points. That means the last or the stations, maybe for the parking or the parks. Then you can see, okay, where is the station point from public transport and the distance to the maybe Swiss parks. Then we also have with Swiss Topo and Autoactive, they provide hiking and biking routes you can just use. And there are also, maybe if it's interesting, the mobile coverage, and there are also data. If you have more detailed questions to this data, we have a API owner who's answering your question on Slack, to how to use it. Also the coaches are introduced. And this afternoon, there's also like a questioning hour with one of our data specialists, so collect data, the question, and then he will help you if you need anything. Yeah. Then from our side, that would be the end. We really want to say thank you. And then we have t-shirts up there. Maybe you want to grab one. We bring them down later. You just can take one. And yeah, we really, really want to thank you, say thank you, danke, merci or grazie. And we really, really wish you a good 2 days. And we are excited to see the results tomorrow. And if you have any question, just come around for tomorrow. We will also answer like questions for career startup programs like HR a little. If you have anything, just come tomorrow afternoon to me and I can give you some informations. And otherwise, yeah, we're just around. If you see us and have a question, just don't hesitate to ask. And yeah, from our side, that would be end. Do you have any really, really questions that should be answered now? Maybe to the challenges regarding. Coaches and so on. So if you have any questions now, take the opportunity to. Well, they will have them later. So. Okay, good. Good. Then. Thank you.
Should be having Corentix. We should be having Michael Gluer, who will be introducing you to the second challenge, which is the Corentix challenge. So I leave the floor to you. Oh yeah, that would be nice.
But I guess I might get that. Yes. Right.
Where are they going?
Everyone leaving?
So where are you going? Sorry, guys. What happened?
Setting off.
Okay, the SBB team. Okay, sorry. Yeah, the SBB team. Okay, that's fine. Sorry. I didn't think about that. Yeah, of course. Sorry.
Okay.
I wasn't understanding. I was like, what's going on?
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Also from the Corentix side, and thanks for a few bright minds staying here for our challenge. Of course, our company might need a bit more introduction than SBB, but I'm really happy to be here and to have all of you here to work on the Corentix challenge and to work on adapting and mitigating climate change. You might wonder what this picture here has to do with climate change. First of all, it doesn't have too much to do with climate change. But for us at Corentix, it really showed how fragile global supply chains are today due to a globalized economy. And we are convinced at Corentix that climate change will bring a lot of costly interruptions and disruptions in the future due to things like what David Presch, for example, explained this morning. More frequent, more severe storms, droughts, flooding, which can lead to disruptions of supply chains. And that's why we want to help companies to make their supply chains future-proof. And there's one question that really guides our work. How can we reduce the risks in the face of the climate crisis while we ensure the sustainability of businesses? So these two aspects, how can we adapt to a changing climate, and how can we make sure at the same time that we become more sustainable? And that's basically this question was the vision, the idea that we had when we started Corentix just this year. So Corentix is a startup company based here in Zurich. It's at the moment just 2 people, Gaudenz and myself. So it's definitely not the size of SBB, but really happy to see also this large crowd motivated to work for a challenge provided by Corentix. So we are really a risk company, a risk data company that helps other companies, so a B2B business, help other companies to understand what climate change means to them and how they can adapt to it. And you might not be able to predict that a ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal, for example, but companies have started to realize that more and more storms, flooding events, other climate hazards such as droughts can lead to costly interruptions of their supply chains. So this is one side of the coin. So the impact of the environment on a business or on a supply chain of a business. On the other hand, companies have also started to work more and more to reduce their impact on the environment. So think about all the efforts to reduce CO2 emissions or to reduce the impact on natural environment, biodiversity loss, all those topics. And both of those dimensions, the impact of the environment on the supply chain, but also the impact of the supply chain on the environment itself, created need for more data-driven analytics. And that's what we want to do with Corentix, and that's also what we want to do with all of you today and during this hackathon. So why is this all important? I think there have been quite a few examples in the recent past that have shown how natural disasters can lead to severe disruptions of supply chains that are quite costly for businesses. So businesses have started to think more and more about that, but often it's not so clear how you can use all the data that is available, and it's great to have had Anna and David speak before. They mentioned like all that data that is out there, public data from the academic community, but also from other sources. But how can you translate that into a business context? And that's our mission that we want to achieve with Corentix, translating all that valuable data that is produced all over the world into a business context and help companies to become more resilient, but also to reduce their impact on the environment. And with that, we want to really focus on 3 aspects. Resilience, it's a word that you heard as well before. How can you become more resilient when something happens? How can you get back on your feet quicker? How can you avoid a big impact of a natural disaster on your company, on your supply chain? How can you become more sustainable along that journey? And then how can you create transparency? And that's a very big and important item as well today in a business context. How can you be transparent around those topics, sustainability and resilience? And well, we are a data-driven company, as I mentioned before. We develop digital solutions that help companies to understand it. Here you see a quick screenshot of what we do, of the platform that we started developing. We want to provide a full overview of supply chain risks from climate hazards, but also other hazards. We include probabilistic modeling and scenario analysis. So you already heard about probabilistic modeling from Climada, from David Bresch, for example. So these are the kind of models that we integrate into our framework to help companies to understand what could be the impact of climate hazards on their business. We also include real-time hazard data, when a storm is on the way, what could be the impact of that storm for the company. And here's just a very simple overview of our initial software. Let's see if it even works. Now this video here. Doesn't seem to be the case. Otherwise, I'm happy to also show it later on. Okay, I think we'll just jump over it and we'll present it to you later on. Okay. Well, let's just quickly jump to the applications before I will then really present the challenge for today. So there are a few applications that we aim to achieve with our solutions. One is the climate impact and scenario analysis. We want to help companies to understand what climate change means for their company, for their supply chains, for their suppliers. Real-time hazard data, we include that as well. We help companies to really understand, not just in the long term, but also today and tomorrow and next week, what could happen because of a storm, a flood, another event that is on the way and might affect them. Big topic also, sustainability and ESG investments. We heard from Anna. It's also a very big topic on the investment side. What is actually the sustainability impact of your business? So there we provide a lot of data as well to better understand, not just for the location of a company. Think about, for example, a car manufacturer in Germany. Of course, it has its sustainability impact as well at the location where they produce, but they also have a huge supplier network. And we need to understand better what is the overall impact of the value chain of a specific company. And that's what we try to achieve. Last but not least, there's also a lot of demand at the moment for reporting on such risks, climate sustainability risks, sometimes already by law, by regulation, that companies need to do that. In other cases also pressure by investors that they want to know more how they deal with climate risks. Yes, of course, I also wanted to mention the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, this is a framework that started a few years ago, and now this decade is the decade of action to achieve those Sustainable Development Goals. And a lot of companies started to align their business activities with those Sustainable Development Goals. And I just mentioned some of them. I hope you've seen those goals as well. I mean, these are really the goals that we want to achieve as a society over the next decade or over this decade. And we work on several of those. Climate action is certainly the most important one, but with our sustainability analytics, we also want to help companies to reduce their impact on life on land, life in the water, and help them to have an economic growth that is sustainable. Now, let's turn to the challenge. That's probably the part that you're most interested in, of course. As you've seen in the data that was provided in the beginning, we want to understand how global trade in agriculture products on one hand side contributes to a changing climate through emissions, but on the other hand also how can we reduce the risks attached to this global trade? Especially when you think about agriculture products, you might think a drought can lead to a reduced production of agriculture products, flooding can destroy a whole harvest. All those factors, they contribute or they attach a risk, a climate risk to all of those trade flows. And here you see just a map of agriculture products that are being traded across the globe. And you already see some interesting aspects here. For example, there's a huge trade flow from Brazil to China. Two of the largest countries by size in the world, they trade agriculture products. You might wonder, is this really necessary? Or is this actually a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions? Then you have, of course, also other aspects in here that can be optimized. You also have, for example, the trade between Mexico and the United States. Even though the distance is not that large, but it's nevertheless a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions just by transporting goods from A to B. And all of those trade routes and trades have in the past been optimized to reduce costs. That's quite obvious. But often they have not been optimized to reduce risks or emissions. And that's, I think, the step that is needed to go forward. So we need a new approach, and we need your help to be creative, to find ways. How can we optimize such a network of global trade to reduce risks and emissions? Okay, and that's a very big challenge, of course, and a big question, and a very open question, but it's really open on purpose. We want to have your creativity to find ways, to find strategies, to find opportunities, how this network could be optimized and how we can basically reduce the risks, the climate risks attached, and also to reduce emissions. And just to give you one example here, this is the trade in coffee from all over the world to Switzerland. Of course, I'm sure a lot of you drink maybe coffee from a big company here, based here in Switzerland, and a lot of that comes from Brazil, from that coffee. So it's been shipped all over the Atlantic, comes here, been processed and then sold again. Some of it is actually being shipped back to Brazil again. So you might think, is this necessary? Can you optimize this trade flow by rearranging such networks? Just one example here, 7,500 tons of coffee is being shipped every year on average from Brazil to Switzerland. If you think about how many container ships you need to just ship coffee around the world, it's of course a huge contributor to emissions. Now, how can you find data about this? And this is something that was also mentioned in the challenge. There's a huge database, the UN Comtrade database, that you can use. You can look at different products that are being traded all over the world. There's an API to that as well. But you can also download it in CSV format or Excel format, and you can start analyzing what are the biggest contributors, what are the most material trade flows that are worth analyzing and optimizing. Then, of course, this was now more about, let's say, the trade flows and emissions attached to them, but you also want to optimize not just to reduce emissions, but you also want to become more resilient. You want to reduce risks. And for that, there are a lot of data sets out there as well, which we want you to use during this challenge, but also feel free to use anything else that you find and which you think is valuable. Here's just one example, the Inform Risk database. It's a country-level database with risks for flooding, drought risk, tropical cyclone risk, so on a country level data that you can use to attach a risk component to those trade flows. But if you're a bit more into, let's say, localized data, climate model output, we also provided you a link to another data set. It's the output of a series or an ensemble of climate models that tells you how certain climate extreme indices, so proxies for drought risk, for example, for extreme flooding, how do those variables change in the future over the next decades? So you can use this data set as well and then link that to the trade flows of agriculture products to attach, as I mentioned before, a risk component to that and to find an optimal way how you can reduce risk while also reducing emissions. Okay. I hope it's clear, like the concept. It's very open on purpose, as I mentioned. I hope you already start thinking about how you could optimize this global trade. And we really need your innovation and creativity. And we hope that you really hack now over the next 24 hours for a more sustainable and resilient future. Thank you very much. Yeah. And if you get very excited about it, I also just wanted to mention that we are a small startup. We are starting up now. We also have a position open. If you really like this challenge and you feel excited about it, just let us know. Okay, I think there are some questions. Thank you very much.
Hello. Could you be a bit more specific about what exactly you expect? Do you expect us to like optimize one specific trade route, for example, because you mentioned some examples from Brazil to Switzerland, from Brazil to China, like or do you expect us to come up with some kind of like general solution that can be applied to any kind of trade route? Also, second question, this challenge is basically split up in two, right? Because it's about the sustainability and the risk. Like how would it be okay if one would only concentrate themselves on one of those challenges, or do you expect us to come up with a solution for both?
Okay, great question. Definitely you can focus on one aspect. That would be, I mean, that's definitely fine. On the other hand, it's also good to have the two things in mind, right? To not just reduce emissions and then increase risks, because in a changing climate, we also need to adapt to that, right? So you don't want to optimize in a way that is then having a negative impact from the risk side. So if you optimize sustainability, but you attach more risk from climate hazards. But I leave it open to you. So you can, if you find a great solution where you reduce emissions in those trade flows, that's perfectly fine. If you find a great way how to reduce climate hazards in those trade flows, that's fine as well. If you split up your team a bit and you think about the two things and put them together, that's even better. But I don't want to prescribe it. And I hope that's fine for you.
How about the first question? Do you expect us to focus on one trade route or like a
No, ideally you focus on the most material one. So I think during your challenge I would start and like analyze a bit the trade database and find the most material ones and find the ones that you think will have the biggest impact. If you feel very, I don't know, excited about coffee, of course you can look at coffee. If you feel very excited about, let's say, the trade in soy, maize, things like that, specific agriculture goods, that's fine as well. But I would really recommend to look at the biggest portions that are the most material portions first. And the trade database is really a great way to find those. Let's jump back here a bit. Right here, you can sort by value of the traded goods, but you can also sort by the tons of goods that are being traded. So I would first look at those and sort them a bit and identify what you want to work on. And then, I mean, it can be applied to other products as well later on. Make sense? Or yeah, sure.
So now we're optimizing for the emissions and the risks. But if you, for example, maybe the recommendation would be, okay, Brazil should not trade with China, but with, I don't know, Argentina. But what if the companies say, but it's too expensive, like we wouldn't implement it, or we wouldn't implement for other reasons?
It's a good point, right? Costs is a third dimension that comes into play as well, and we'll not get away from that. I mean, as I mentioned in the beginning, cost has been the main driver why those trade routes are structured like they are today. Today, I really want to focus a bit less on the cost side to keep our minds open. Where are the opportunities? And of course, they come at the cost, but I would keep this a bit in the back today because yes, adapting to climate change will cost in the short term. Becoming more sustainable will cost in the short term, but in the long term, that should be the message. It's actually the more cost-efficient way to go for the future. No, not yet.
No, I think it should be. Yeah.
Okay.
I was wondering how flexible can or should we be considering the impact of climate change on the country of production? Because like I don't know, with the change in climate, that lots of products won't be able to be produced in future. How much should we take these things in consideration?
I mean, it's a very good point. That's something that we start looking into as well, that in the future, maybe that country does not provide the ideal conditions anymore to grow, let's say, coffee or maize or other crops. I think it goes probably a bit too far to what is possible now within 24 hours. If you have some ideas that you want to bring in, feel free. But I think I would rather focus on what is possible today. How does the climate change in those regions? How does the risk change? And how should we structure now the supply chains of agriculture goods accordingly? Yeah. Yes, a bit less. I would focus less on the production itself. Yeah.
So I think the rules now exist already, having not only that the big why it forms like this, not only because of the okay, I can import something from there, and but there's just multiple really complicated reasons for that. I want to know, like, how realistic should we be? For example, if we just think that, okay, if for example, from this country to another country, that's and instead another country, it would end better. But I mean, like, in realistic, it doesn't really. I don't think it could happen. Like.
Yes, I mean, I think we need to be a bit open to what could happen in the future if you want to achieve those very challenging goals of. I mean, Paris Agreement that we mentioned, right? We want to reduce emissions significantly. We need to be open for new ideas. I mean, just to give an example, does it make sense to send pineapples from one country to the other, to chop it up, pack it up, and then send it back to that country again for sale? Probably not from a climate perspective. So I think there's a lot of optimization that can be done that is realistic. Certain things we can probably not avoid, and we need to find other solutions for that. But keep your mind open. If you see now in this database trade flows like potatoes going from one country to the other and then straight back again, or doing a tour around the globe just for example, for packaging, for processing, maybe it's worth having a more local economy of those products. What I mentioned with the example between Brazil and China, does it make sense to ship, for example, meat across the globe? I think there is a lot to optimize, and I think that's where your creativity is needed. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
To touch again on like costs. Can we assume that the laws and kind of restrictions are gonna change, which will towards climate change? So basically, it's gonna be more costly to do something in the future. Like, can we assume that this is already the case, or should we always work with what's the case now? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with what we have today, the regulatory framework. But one thing that you can certainly keep in mind, and that also answers a bit the question about the costs, is that we might have a much more expensive carbon tax in the future, right? That then shipping becomes more expensive, and then maybe some of the trade routes that we have today are not the most cost-efficient ones either. So I think that's maybe an idea that you can keep in mind, that in the future, emissions will be more expensive for companies.
And I have another question regarding at which point in the whole organization do you step in? You're kind of a consulting company, right?
Yes, we are a data provider and consulting company to a certain extent, while the consulting component is probably the smaller part. Yeah.
And do you provide like one specific a defined information to a company at one time point, or do you keep in touch with a company over a kind of time frame to develop new ways with them?
Yes, I mean, here we really provide the software as a service, basically. So they have our software. They can analyze it when they need to. They can get informed about new hazard types. So it's definitely a long-term relationship. It's not like a one-time consulting mandate. We go to them and tell them what they could optimize, but it's rather they should use our software to better understand and to have the tools in their businesses as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will you show the software?
Yes, I was hoping to have the video on the screen, but maybe we can show it later on during really live and not just as a video. Yeah, I think we have an opportunity for that.
By agricultural goods, do you mean only like edible things or also machinery, seeds, and things like that?
I would focus on the edible things or things that are being processed. Then I would focus less on, let's say, fertilizer or machinery, things like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Good. Thanks a lot, and good luck. And looking really forward to see what comes out of this hackathon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So before you go, wait a minute. I mean, it's not very effective now because everybody's gone, and I wasn't planning on this, but yeah. I would like to just have a closing statement. So I would first like, so basically also in front of the camera, to thank our sponsors who made this event possible. So we have our main gold sponsor, which is SBB, who's providing the main challenge. And we also have Zurich Tourism as a silver sponsor. And we have SkySail, and Domino's, who will be providing the pizzas that will arrive in just a matter of a few minutes. And we have recently Hopfab, who sponsored us with some beer too. Big applause for that. Just a few things about the how the event is going to be following. So as you know, you have the document that you can always check on Slack. Everything is going to be happening on Slack. So please always keep an eye on what's happening on Slack. We will announce everything through it. You have the help and QA channel for the coaching session. He's going to talk about that right now in a minute. And you will all be assigned team referees. These team referees are going to keep track of the status of your products. If you have any doubts, any problems, you go to these team referees. We will tell you in a minute. So that's it. I'll just let Simone tell you a couple of things about the coaching.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Miguel. So I'm Simone Biasco, I'm a postdoc in physics, and I am a member of the coaching team. So the PolyHACK will provide support in two ways. You will have a fixed referee that will be assigned to your team, and to whom you can ask a general question, and in particular, this person will be in charge for the development of your project, and how the collaboration is effective, how the tasks are divided, etc. For more scientific and technical questions, we have also a team of science and data analysis coaches that will be happy to answer different questions that will be mostly, let's say, focused on technical parts like coding, data analysis, science. We have different members with different specialties. So people who are more expert in statistical analysis, people who are more expert in coding, other in economics or environmental science. And we are all available, so not only for one challenge, but for all of them. This means you don't have to expect that we will solve your tiny error in the compiling of your code, but we can give you ideas on how to get insights from your data. So how you are processing the information you're given as a starting point of your challenges, and how this can give you insights and guide your strategies to solve the two challenges, okay? You will be given a link on our Help QA channel on Slack so that you can book a slot of time with us tonight at 7 p.m. until like more or less 9:30, and tomorrow morning from 9 a.m. on, okay? Thank you so much.
Great. And now you have 25 hours to hack because there's the time shift happening tonight. So you got 1 extra hour. Yes.
I mean, it's not really yeah. Will the presentations with all the QR codes and stuff still be uploaded for reference for us?
Yeah, we'll talk now with Anna and Professor Bresch to see when we can provide you with all those. Yes. Okay. That's it. Good luck.